In this video, I take this large live edge slab you see in the middle here, bring it home, I go through the flattening process of it, stabilize it with epoxy, finish it off, and turn it into this beautiful spalted maple sit-to-stand desk. Stay tuned. What's going on, guys? It's Brady with BradyHummel.com. So I've never really been someone that can sit still for too long. Editing videos and photos, that takes quite a while at a computer. So I had to do something, so I decided to make a sit-to-stand desk. So I started with assembling the base. The base I got was from Vori Desk. The setup process was super easy on it. The instructions were actually really easy to follow, and I had it together in like 15 minutes. For the money, I think this is one of the best bases you can get. I did a lot of research. I'll have this linked below on Amazon. They also make it pretty affordable for the desktop to come with it too. I opted to make my own desktop, but I really liked this one because of the commercial grade quality, as well as it had 2 motors in the legs, not just one. More on this base later. The 2 motors were definitely going to come in handy as I was using this large spalted maple live edge slab. So I picked this slab up locally from a guy named Jesse. He's the owner of Timbercrete. He mills all of this, and as you can see, he's got quite the collection. And the crazy part is he said this doesn't even scratch the surface of what he has. I'll link his site below. He's also a furniture maker, does some beautiful work. Be sure to check him out. So I got the slab home and was just kind of thinking of the best way I could go about doing it with the tools I have. The slab was just under 12 foot long and about 18 inches wide. So I started off by cutting the slab directly in half. The slab was also about 2.5 inches thick. So this left me with 2 halves about 70 inches apiece. So I took the first half, and what I was going to do is, this is the half I was going to keep both the live edge and use both those pieces. So I marked the center line and took a chalk line and snapped that right across it. I then used my cheap little do-it-yourself track saw made from MDF along with my circular saw and took a few passes to make this cut. As you can see, my track saw isn't really long enough, but I made it work here coming up. Just did the first cut and then moved along to that. It wasn't quite enough to get all the way through, so I took the Sawzall, cut it the rest of the way through. So the reason I cut it in half like that was I was going to take the second piece and basically cut the live edge material off of this. The live edge material on this was in worse shape than the other half. So I snapped a chalk line down one side of it to cut it off. And this was going to kind of give me a straight edge. I could then cut it down to a width on my table saw that was more easily to work with. So after I got that through, I took it over to my table saw and I cut it to width. Now the width I cut it to was 13 inches because my planer, as you can see right there in the frame, is a 13-inch planer. So this was the largest I could cut it to in order to fit it through my planer. And I just kind of roughly laid it out how I was going to do this. So I then took the pieces into my basement area where I used this Total Bolt penetrating epoxy. The reason I did this now is before I went through the planing and milling portion of this, I really wanted to salvage most of this wood. There was quite a bit of punky areas around the live edge part, so I really wanted to stabilize that first before I started running it through the planer and everything. I also diluted that with denatured alcohol, which allowed it to penetrate even more. And that's just going to stabilize the wood. The next day I took a piece of particle board, and this I also ripped down to the width I could fit through my planer. And right here I'm forming a planer sled. I only have a 6-inch jointer. So basically this was going to turn my planer into a 13-inch jointer where I could put all 3 of those pieces through there and get a flat surface on one side. So that's just a piece of particle board, and I took some MDF to create a little ledge there to butt the surface up of the slabs. So I took the slabs and I put the bottom part up first and just hot glued around it. A couple of the slabs I did have to shim up with hot glue. So I did this to all 3 pieces. I ran them through my planer to get one flat side on one side of each piece. I then took each piece off of the planer sled. I used a chisel just to pry off the hot glue. And that left me with one flat side. And as you can see here, this shows you how good of a job that penetrating epoxy did. You can hear how solid that was. That was like styrofoam when I first started, so that penetrating epoxy did a good job. So I then put the flat side down and ran all 3 pieces through my planer to get them all to the same thickness. And this took quite a bit of time. I probably planed for an easy hour and a half, blew the breaker a couple times, emptied the dust collecting thing a couple times, but towards the end of the day, I finally had them all to the same thickness. And I laid them out in a variation I liked before putting them through the jointer. So this left me with about a 30-inch wide piece, which was plenty for the desk I wanted. So I then took my jointer and I had to move it around a little bit because the jointer bed on my jointer is not that long. So I was using my workbench, which also goes up and down, and I just made it even there to extend the outfeed table. This was just going to help me handle the pieces a lot easier. And then went through and ran each piece through my jointer. To get perfectly flat edges on each of the pieces. That rigid jointer just does a great job. It's just the bed isn't quite long enough. So then it was on to the glue up. And no, I don't use dominoes or biscuits or anything. If the pieces are properly joined, you don't need anything else. The glue is plenty enough to hold it. There's no reason to put any other fasteners in there. The glue is plenty. You just want to make sure it's jointed properly. And you want a little bit of squeeze out. Once the squeeze out comes through, I just usually take like a little squeegee thing and wipe it off. And then just take a wet rag and wipe off the excess. Next day it was all glued up, and now I wanted to just put it on sawhorses and cut it down to length. So I took that track saw again, cut it down to length. I think I ended up with it about 66 inches long. So if you guys are enjoying this video, definitely please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more videos. I would greatly appreciate that. So I went through and lightly sanded it with 80 grit sandpaper just to get the loose stuff off the bark. And then took it upstairs into my kitchen. The reason I did that was because the next was to do the epoxy to fill the voids and stabilize a few places. And upstairs is a lot warmer than my garage this time of year, with the wood stove going and everything, so I was able to have this epoxy cured in 24 hours so I could continue working on it tomorrow. So as you can see, when I mixed up the epoxy, I mixed in sawdust with it, as well as some black pigment. The reason I did that is because putting it on the edge like that would have been completely impossible. Now, I could have poured the top and then thickened it to put it on the edge, but I just decided to thicken it right from the beginning and basically use it as spackle, and it actually worked out really well. As you can see right there, that would have been impossible to do with just regular epoxy. It would have just dripped out. So the next day, that was all cured, and I was able to start the sanding process, which was quite the long process. As you can see, I get this little time lapse right here. This was probably close to 2 hours of just straight sanding. I did use some CA glue to touch up a few places of the epoxy. And then also there was a few punky spots I missed with the penetrating epoxy, which the CA glue worked well with too, so keep that in mind for punky wood. And then this was the final sanding. I marked it with a pencil and just took 220 grit sandpaper and went over the full thing. And that was just a couple of the sanding pads I went through. I went through a ton of sanding pads. So I started with the bottom of the desk. I just put 2 coats of Minwax water-based polyacrylic. I used satin. And what I do is I put 2 coats on pretty heavy on the bottom. And that's all I do for the bottom. Flip it over. For the top, I did put my logo on. If this was for a customer, I probably wouldn't have done this unless they requested it. But since it was my desk, I liked the look of it. It kind of flowed nicely with the spalting. So I put that on the top front left corner and started finishing the top. The top, I do like 4 or 5 coats of this, and I put it on lighter than the bottom. The bottom I do 2 heavy coats, the top I do 5 lighter coats. And as you can see, this polyacrylic really just doesn't change the color too much, but it darkens the spalting and gives it a really nice blonde color to the maple. And I just love the way that finish looked. The main reason I chose spalted maple was the spalting is just a form of art itself. I really enjoy spalted maple, even furthermore than black walnut. I know black walnut's the big thing right now, but spalted maple is just beautiful. So then it was back to the base. I needed to mount that to the slab. I just marked it out, marked the center lines, and I used a pilot bit to go through the holes. And I just used screws, but I highly recommend you use threaded inserts. I did order threaded inserts, but Amazon was like 5 days to be delivered, so much for that 2-day prime shipping, Amazon. But anyway, I wanted to get this done, so I used screws, and we're moving here shortly, so when I go to take this apart to move, I'll definitely put in the threaded inserts when I put it back together at the new place. But this thing went back together super easy. You just plugged the motor into each leg, and you can hide all the wires right in the bottom. I then connected this to the top once it was flipped over. This is just to control your top going up and down. Then set it back up, and this project was basically done. I really like the way it came out, and it's very nice to just one button, I can hit it and be in standing mode. So I think this is going to allow me to be a lot more productive editing videos. So definitely subscribe for more, because I've got a lot of videos coming. And a huge thank you to Vori Desk for supplying the base for this project. The base worked super good because this spalted maple slab wasn't light, and it handles it no problem even with all my stuff on top of the desk. Super happy with how it came out, and I'll have it linked all down below. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you got any questions, definitely leave a comment. Thanks for watching the video. Catch you in the next one.